The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic, born alone in liberty.
Liberty. Liberty.
Liberty.
Liberty.
Liberty. Liberty.
Liberty. Liberty.
Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner, cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
America stands ready to vote in the first midterm election of the Donald Trump era. We'll talk about it every which way but loose. Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com, and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. Donald Trump will not be on the ballot on Tuesday, but he might as well be since these midterm elections are shaping up as a referendum on Trump and his presidency. And while many will vote on the economy and jobs, immigration, and perhaps health care, we'll discuss the single most important thing at stake. Joe Schaeffer, political correspondent for LibertyNation.com, will join us to discuss the polls showing a decided edge for Democrats and whether they're likely to be on target or miss the mark by a mile like 2 years ago. And LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza joins us to talk turkey about Trump's latest audacious proposal to end birthright citizenship. Is it right or wrong? And can it be done by the president alone or even by Congress?
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We kick things off with our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out some of the most wacky, astonishing, and damnable things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. We'll get the lay of the land on the midterm elections as seen from both sides of the aisle, the chairs of both the Republican and Democratic national committees. But first, the woman who the leftist Daily Beast describes as like a Halloween ghoul who keeps rising from the grave to terrorize the American public is back at it. Hillary Clinton said at the latest stop on her nationwide excuse tour that she is far from ruling out another run for the big house in 2020.
Do you want to run again?
No.
Wait.
No.
That was a pause.
Well, I'd like to be president.
Okay.
The work would be work that I feel very well prepared for, having been in the Senate for 8 years, having been a diplomat in the State Department. And it's just going to be a lot of heavy lifting.
So are you going to be doing any of that lifting? Do you feel like...
Oh, I have no idea, Kara, but I'm going to, I'm not going to even think about it until we get through this November 6th election about what's going to happen after that.
Well, I'm sure Democrats are delighted to hear Hillary's rested and ready. Not. But hey, Republicans are. They'd be happy to have her run. Donald Trump would enjoy kicking her butt a second time. But as we count down the hours before these elections, the demonization of white people has become louder than ever on the left, or specifically CNN and MSNBC, after those bombs sent to leftists and a raging anti-Semite murdering 11 people in a Pittsburgh synagogue. Here again is the most appropriately named man on TV, Don Lemon, CNN.
We have to stop demonizing people and realize the biggest terror threat in this country is white men, most of them radicalized to the right. And we have to start doing something about them. There is no travel ban on them. There is no ban on, they had the Muslim ban. There is no white guy ban. So what do we do about that?
So he preaches on not demonizing people and then demonizes white men. This is what CNN has become, a clearinghouse for race hustlers. But the same stoking of racial divisions is happening around the clock on MSNBC, where the neo-Marxist professor from Princeton, Eddie Gaude, spewed pure, undiluted racism.
What I did wrong in 2016 is I overestimated white people. I didn't think white people would put him in office. So here he is running around the country, appealing to our darker angels, appealing to our hatreds and fears. Some ideal of whiteness that Donald Trump represents and spews out of his mouth every single day.
So this is all the left has, all racism all the time. Keep that in mind when you vote, if you haven't already. A lot of early voting all over the place. Meanwhile, President Trump made the succinct case for voting Republican at rallies all over the country this week.
The choice could not be more clear. Democrats produce mobs. Republicans produce jobs.
Mobs versus jobs, results versus resistance. Those are the two basic mantras for Republicans. And the chairwoman of the Republican National Committee, Ronna McDaniel, said on Fox News that control of the House depends on a bunch of races rated as too close to call.
It's neck and neck in about 21 races across the country. Neck and neck. So it's going to depend on turnout. So what I am seeing in this early voting right now and the early absentee returns that we're seeing across the country is that we're hitting 2016 levels. Enthusiasm is high with Democrats, but Republicans are matching it. And I feel good about a lot of these battleground states that we are turning out our vote. So can we sustain that through Election Day? And we have the best closer in the business in President Trump, making his case in all of these battleground states in the final waning days of this election. So we can keep the House, and I think we will keep the Senate and perhaps expand and gain seats, which is unprecedented in that first midterm of a first-term president.
Meanwhile, the chair of the Democrat National Committee, Tom Perez, went on CNN and said health care is the issue that will be the Republicans' downfall.
They're hemorrhaging on the health care issue. Health care is the number one issue in this country. Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid are right up there. They can't talk about those because they're on the wrong side. They want to cut Medicare. They want to cut Medicaid. They voted to repeal the Affordable Care Act how many times? They don't care if you have a pre-existing condition. You're out of luck. And so they have to distract. They have to fearmonger. And his dog whistle of all dog whistles is immigration. This has been Donald Trump's playbook for so long. And you know what? When they go low, we go vote.
Right. First it was Michelle Obama. When they go low, we go high, which is, of course, laughable. Then Eric Holder recently, when they go low, we kick them. Now sanitized for your protection to when they go low, we go vote. Clever enough, perhaps, to distract from what Eric Holder said, perhaps not, and proving once again that he will not be bound by political tradition. President Trump threw a political grenade into the mix just days before the election, saying he will end the system that automatically makes the children born to illegal immigrants citizens.
The Democrats want to continue giving automatic birthright citizenship to every child born to an illegal alien, even if they've been on our soil for only a matter of seconds. Hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrant children are made automatic citizens every year because of this crazy policy, and they are all made instantly eligible for every privilege and benefit of American citizenship at a cost of billions of dollars a year.
We will drill down on whether ending birthright citizenship is a good or bad idea, and whether it's even possible without a constitutional amendment when we're joined by LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza a bit later on. But up next, will all those pollsters predicting some sort of blue wave be proven right, or will it be a repeat of their disastrous performance 2 years ago?
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Exhausted by all the fake news? On LibertyNation.com's YouTube channel, facts and fresh, bold analysis are what you get without the leftist spin. Subscribe today to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel and get our Truth is Making a Comeback America's Top Stories, with LN Editor-in-Chief Lisa K. Donner, an alternative to the leftist programs on TV. 5 facts, just the facts, ma'am, without the liberal bias. LN Radio, syndicated from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. Listen to all the big names in politics with your host, Tim Donner. LN TV, the right analysis with our Liberty Nation authors from across the globe. The Uprising Podcast, fun and entertaining commentary on what's really going on in the swamp with Scott Cosenza and Tim Donner. All this and more when you subscribe to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel today, because
truth is
making
a
comeback.
What we have heard here today has been a political spectacle.
We elect these guys to run the country. They're just not doing their job.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Blue wave, red wave, immigration, healthcare, the economy, and jobs. Donald Trump himself. Those are the buzzwords for the 2018 midterm elections, now just a matter of hours away. Will Republicans hold the House, or will Democrats seize control? Will the GOP maintain or add to their razor-thin majority in the Senate? Is this election effectively a referendum on President Donald Trump? Joining us to preview Tuesday's 468 House and Senate races, not individually, is LibertyNation.com political correspondent Joe Schaeffer, who was ahead of the curve in predicting that Trump would beat Hillary Clinton in 2016. Welcome, Joe.
Thanks, Tim. Good to be here.
Well, let's start with the polls and the people who conduct them. Most of them have shown Democrats ahead by some 6 to 8 points in the generic ballot. But in a piece you wrote for LibertyNation.com recently entitled New Crystal Ball, Same Anti-Trump Forecast, you discuss what you call the establishment-tied pollsters still playing the uniparty elephant versus donkey game through the traditional lens of politics, not the one from the Trump era. Now, considering the number of Trump voters who went undetected 2 years ago, do you think they're doing the same thing this time, making the same mistake this year?
It's exactly what they're doing, and I wouldn't call it a mistake because I think this is what they're paid to do. They are basically there to lift the Democrats, to boost their output. And when you think about a guy like Sabato, he came up with a mea culpa. We missed it. We blew it in 2016.
But you should listen to us this time.
Yeah. And one of the things he said was that he talked to a pollster and they said they blew it with the rural white vote. They didn't see that coming and all that. So here we go again, 2018, and they're downplaying the rural white vote again, and they're boosting up all these things like there's a suburban female backlash coming, and it's going to wipe out Trump, and the Democrats going to take the House. Well, there's no reason to believe that that's true. First of all, there's no reason to believe that Trump only gets his support from rural voters. That's not true. There's plenty of people in the suburbs who are going to vote for Trump. And then the idea, which is identity politics, and they love to say educated women, because if you're educated, you don't vote for Donald Trump.
Absolutely not. Of course not. You're right.
So educated females, of course, they're not going to vote for Trump. And that's the suburbs are filled with educated females. And then they say this and then they believe it. And then they're surprised when they lose.
Well, one of the more underreported aspects of this blue wave narrative is that some 40 Republicans are retiring from Congress, most of them because they don't have the stomach to battle the Trump haters and defend this president. What effect do these retirements have on this election?
Yeah, that's a funny thing because you and I both agree this is a new political era. Trump does not fit in the old models of looking at the way campaigns and elections are won. So Trump won because people were sick of the status quo. So a bunch of Republicans leaving office, retiring, when Trump's supporters are all for getting out the old establishment types, term limits, and get new blood in there, how is that going to hurt Trump? How is that going to hurt the Republican Party? So I know incumbency is important, and I know it's important in House races, but it's not everything. And I don't understand why that necessarily gives the Democrats an advantage.
Our guest, Joe Schaeffer, political correspondent for LibertyNation.com. So, Joe, what do you make of this Florida governor's race pitting a full-on Trumpist, Ron DeSantis, against a full-on Bernie Sanders-style progressive Democrat, Andrew Gillum, who's led in almost all of the polls but has a shrinking lead in the home stretch? I'm wondering if we could see in this race, which sort of sets the two sides apart from each other as dramatically as any other race, could we see another example of the so-called Bradley effect, where people tell pollsters they'll vote for the black guy, but then they don't?
It's very interesting that you say that. I don't know if you saw the recent Project Veritas expose of Gillum's staff.
I did.
James O'Keefe, and one of his staffers says, well, at first he says Florida is a cracker state, which is pretty inflammatory. But the more interesting thing he says is that it's their plan, basically, to play on white guilt. That's a strategy for them to win. And I think that if you look at that in the grand scheme of things, white people are not going to tell a pollster necessarily that they're going to vote against Gillum when the narrative is, you're a racist somehow if you don't support the black Democrat. Maybe people think that, I don't know, but I do think that they think the media is going to think something's wrong with you if you don't enthusiastically support the Democrat just because he happens to be black, which is a terrible reason to vote for anybody, Republican or Democrat.
One of the great ironies of this election, Joe, is that outside of their pronounced hatred of Trump and their vow to try and reverse everything he's done, the only actual issue brought to the fore by Democrats is health care. So these Democrats who gave us Obamacare and lost literally hundreds of federal and state seats because of it now think they can shift the responsibility for health care issues over to the GOP because Republicans failed to fully repeal Obamacare. Will that strategy work?
I don't think it'll work at all because if you recall, they brought up that big issue where they were saying the Republicans were pushing these garbage plans. Well, it was just a situation where they were offering more opportunities for people who were healthy and didn't want to pay a lot for insurance. It was just another option for people that they didn't have to do or not. And the Democrats demonized that as the most evil thing ever. I don't think you're going to get much traction out of calling something evil. This jobs in the economy is what people keep saying are the most important things. And Democrats really don't have any answer for Trump on jobs. Trump is pushing bring jobs back to America, bring manufacturing back to America. These are popular things. America first, I think people largely think of that in terms of employment. And Democrats have not come up for an answer for that.
Thanks for joining us, Joe.
Thank you.
Joe Schaeffer, LibertyNation.com. Quick break, and then we're back to discuss the most important thing at stake in Tuesday's elections.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
What we have heard here today has been a political spectacle.
We elect these guys to run the country. They're just not doing their job.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Syndicated from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. And a shout out this week to the good folks of Lake Havasu City, Arizona, listening on KNTR 106.3 FM. Did you know Lake Havasu City is the home of the original London Bridge? Memorialized in the old tune, London Bridge is Falling Down. Yeah, they bought the bridge when the Brits replaced it with a new one back in 1968. So, as usual, many an issue is animating voters in the run-up to Tuesday's midterm elections. President Trump and Republicans are touting the soaring economy and record-low unemployment while maximizing the political opportunity presented by the migrant caravan to draw a sharp contrast with the Democrats on immigration. Democrats, in turn, believe they can galvanize widespread hatred of Trump among their base, their leftist base, and somehow shift the blame for voter unrest about health care to the GOP, which is ironic given the pounding Democrats have taken and electoral losses, widespread electoral losses they've suffered because of Obamacare. But the polls are showing those three issues, the economy, immigration, and health care, are running neck and neck at the top of the list of issues important to voters. But while the more than 2-decade-old slogan, which famously drove the Bill Clinton presidential campaign, "It's the economy, stupid," remains valid to be sure, the GOP would be well advised to add another iteration of that mantra in this last few days of the election season by swapping out one word from that phrase. It's the committees, stupid. See, what really matters to both parties at this point is not so much the actual seats won or lost, but that they hold the majority in the House and Senate, and thus the committees which dictate the entire legislative agenda. So if you offered Republicans right now, hours before the election, the certainty that they would suffer a net loss of 22 seats in the House on Tuesday, one less than the Democrats need to seize control of the lower chamber, they would undoubtedly take that deal because they'd still be holding the speakership and chairmanship of all the committees. And most significantly in the Donald Trump era, they would deny Democrats subpoena power, something the Dems would undoubtedly unleash with a fury through countless investigations of Trump and his allies. And then, of course, there's articles of impeachment. What prevented the appointment of Merrick Garland, who would have swung the Supreme Court to the left? It was the majority power held by Senator Mitch McConnell, chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, who refused to bring that nomination forward. What saved the Brett Kavanaugh nomination? The GOP's continuing majority and control of that same Judiciary Committee. What allowed Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch to be confirmed with slim majorities rather than the 60 votes previously required for confirmation? Well, once again, it was the power of McConnell to change the rules, as Harry Reid had done previously for lower court appointments when Democrats controlled the Senate. And here's another one. What allowed the tax reform bill to be passed outside the normal legislative process by budget reconciliation? Again, Republicans holding the whip hand. On the House side now, imagine for a moment the people who would become Speaker of the House, chair the committees, and hold subpoena power if Democrats seize the majority. Nancy Pelosi would be given the gavel. But if that's not enough incentive to get Republicans to the polls, consider this one. Maxine Waters as chairperson of the House Financial Services Committee. She would actually wield power over banks and insurance companies and housing, but more importantly, she has all but promised to use every last bit of her newfound leverage to target the president in any and every way possible with the ultimate aim of removing Trump from office. Now, we all know by now about her urging people to name and shame Trump officials in public, but it goes beyond that. Mad Max, who commenced her long-running demand for the impeachment of Donald Trump only days after the 2016 election, actually betrayed a full-on religious conviction in declaring, she actually said this, that she was sent by God to impeach Donald Trump. And she later added that, I wake up in the middle of the night and all I can think about is, I'm going to get him. Democrat-run committees would undoubtedly launch investigations into everything from Trump's finances to his environmental and education and foreign policies and beyond. None of Trump's decisions would be immune from microscopic-level scrutiny. An endless parade of Democrat-friendly witnesses would be called to testify. Work on virtually everything in the House other than examinations of the inner recesses of Trump and his administration would be shut down. Listen to the words of Congressman Jerry Conley, Democrat of Virginia. Here's how he put it regarding multiple issues that the Democrats are chomping at the bit to investigate. Quote, "When we do take over, you bet we're going to have those hearings," unquote. So when you and other voters go to the polls in this midterm election disguised as a referendum on President Trump, you might well be thinking about the economy. I mean, people always do, and they should. But you'd be well advised to also consider carefully what will surely happen if you hand power back to the same political party renounced by the voters the last time around. Quick break, and then we're back to discuss birthright citizenship.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Exhausted by all the fake news? On LibertyNation.com's YouTube channel, facts and fresh, bold analysis are what you get without the leftist spin. Subscribe today to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel and get our Truth is Making a Comeback. America's Top Stories. With LN Editor-in-Chief Lisa K. Donner, an alternative to the leftist programs on TV. 5 facts, just the facts, ma'am, without the liberal bias. LN Radio, syndicated from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. Listen to all the big names in politics with your host, Tim Donner. LN TV, the right analysis with our Liberty Nation authors from across the globe. The Uprising Podcast, fun and entertaining commentary on what's really going on in the swamp with Scott Cosenza and Tim Donner. All this and more when you subscribe to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel today, because
Truth
is making a
comeback.
And we have now reached the segment of Liberty Nation Radio which we call Talkin' Liberty, as we're joined by constitutional lawyer and LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor, our regular contributor, Scott Cosenza. Hello, Scott.
Hello, Tim.
All right, anchor babies, birthright citizenship, the long-held interpretation of the 14th Amendment, which makes the children of illegal immigrants citizens upon birth.
Somebody think of the children, Tim.
The entire debate centering around 5 words in the 14th Amendment, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Take it from there.
Well, the debate, if you want just a primer on it, is does that sentence or that clause of that sentence require then that all, as we say, children born in the United States of America are then citizens? Trump says, according to the analysis that he's relying on, that that's not the case. That's definitely a minority analysis, Tim. I think that it's probably wrong. And in any case, then there's a secondary analysis, which is, if that is the case, then can Trump change that law or rule, or the current status of the law or rule, with an executive order, which is how he said he wishes to proceed?
Must it be done by the legislature?
Yes.
The legislature could, for example, pass something declaring that the children of illegal immigrants are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. That's one way the legislature could do it, for example.
Perhaps. If the Supreme Court, if there was a ruling, so I say if the Supreme Court, and when it's important for me to add, Tim, that I don't necessarily agree that they should be the arbiter of all these disputes, but in the real politics analysis
that's
of how
what
things,
happens.
right.
Yeah.
This is going to get challenged, and it's going to go to the Supreme Court. So if the Supreme Court says that the 14th Amendment allows for such meddling or a more charitable word by the Congress. Thank you, Tim. A reinterpretation by the Congress. Then yes, that would be the appropriate venue.
Now, One of the things that I think people haven't looked at in this is they look at the actual words and try to give their own personal interpretations of it, which is all people are able to do at this point. It seems to me they're not thinking about the 14th Amendment in the context of the three so-called Reconstruction Amendments that happened right after the Civil War. The 13th Amendment outlawing slavery and voluntary servitude. The 14th declaring all persons born or naturalized in the U.S. Becoming citizens. And the 15th, which prohibits denying a citizen the right to vote based on their race, color, or previous condition of servitude. These three happened within 3 years of the end of the Civil War. So is it not clear that the 14th Amendment, along with the 13th and 15th, were designed specifically to make slaves citizens of the United States?
I don't think there's any doubt or debate that that's true, but that doesn't give us any guidance as to what in 2018 that should mean, because the way immigration laws work, and we didn't have illegal immigrants in 1866 like we have illegal immigrants in 2018. So we can't say, as I've heard said, I don't think it's a legit argument to say, well, it doesn't mean it because of X, Y, and Z, when those things weren't even contemplated. So it's sort of like saying, But it goes to original intent. And now here's where I want to parse a couple of judicial philosophies, Scott, because the words originalist and textualist often are used interchangeably, particularly talk about Antonin Scalia, for example. He's an originalist or a textualist. Well, here's where I think it's parsed, because a textualist says we must go by the literal words in the text exactly as they're written. The common meaning of the term, the commonly understood meaning of the term at the time, I believe is their mantra.
Somewhat. But they want every word of the Constitution to be translated or interpreted literally. As an originalist, what you say is you believe in what the intent of the statute or law or amendment was at the time that it was written. In that context, again, is it not clear that this was intended fully to make slaves citizens of the United States after they were freed via the 13th Amendment and the end of the Civil War?
Yeah, it is clear. But then the Congress went and created this whole new category of people. So it would be appropriate, I would say, Tim, if they want to create this category of people by having immigration laws that create a category of those people, then the Constitution needs to be amended. I think the plain language of the Constitution as amended means these people are citizens. And I think that if you want to say that that's not a good policy because it's a suicide pact or something else, then it's appropriate to amend the Constitution rather than back end the analysis.
But again, playing devil's advocate here, when you look at birthright citizenship, are we not engaging in something of a living constitution where we're saying that illegal immigrants weren't foreseen at that time, but because the words lock us into a particular interpretation, in contemporary terms, aren't we really dealing with the fact of a living Constitution versus the original intent of the Constitution if we say that the children of illegal immigrants who were not envisioned at the time automatically become citizens?
I don't think so. In fact, you could argue that they could protect against the very thing that it was originally envisioned to protect against. And what I mean by that is what happens to a class of people who aren't citizens but are here and have no path to citizenship? Meaning, like, let's say, what is there, 30 million illegals here?
Well, the latest, like the Yale MIT study said 22 million.
If none of them were their, I mean, at least their kids are citizens. And it's likely that we're not going to engage in any kind of activity that would lead to 30 million people leaving the country.
Now, again, looking at the origins of this anchor baby birthright citizenship thing, you are aware, right, that this was originally a feudal doctrine that was used by England as a way to force allegiance to the crown, which means if you're born in England, then you are automatically forced to have allegiance to the king or the queen, to the crown. So it's a feudal doctrine that's, been abolished by the UK, by Australia, and I think 7 other countries, many of whom are our allies. So why should we continue to have this when it's a clear magnet for illegal immigrants?
What would you replace it with?
I would replace it with legislation that declares that illegal immigrants and their offspring who were born here are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, because they're not. Or are they? Give me the argument for how illegal immigrants and their children are subject to the jurisdiction.
The argument is very simple, and that is that the crafters of the 14th Amendment wanted to make sure that they weren't making citizens of the foreign subjects who were invited here in a diplomatic fashion, Tim. So ambassadors, envoys, the families and servants there, too, that are loyal to the Crown of England, perhaps, or any of the others that existed and exist, that they were not being made citizens by being born here.
But aren't illegals still, by definition, don't they still owe their allegiance to the country that they
there's a big difference, I think, from somebody who quits Honduras and walks to the United States. And what do you think their sense of allegiance is to Honduras versus the ambassador to Honduras who came and presented credentials
But presumably
to the White House?
they're citizens of Honduras, and therefore their allegiance, so to speak, is still to that government.
I don't think that's true, Tim, because the people themselves, in the first instance, would claim allegiance to Honduras or wherever. And in the second case, I don't believe they would. And in any case, I'm sure that if it were a condition of being granted citizenship or residency, they would quit Honduras and claim allegiance to America. So I don't think that's a fairly easily defeated argument.
So what is your interpretation, your personal interpretation as an ESQ, an Esquire?
Thank you, Tim.
What is your...
Thank you for that.
You paid a lot for that privilege. You have the right to use it.
I think it means that subject to the jurisdiction thereof actually goes to kind of buoy my point that I just made, which is to say that when the United States government invites foreign diplomats and their servants and servers to the United States to conduct their business, they're not subject to U.S. jurisdiction, usually by treaty. And if not by treaty, usually by international law, which is to say the ambassador comes over, right? They're not subject to U.S. law. If the Saudis murdered a Saudi citizen in the Saudi embassy in Washington, D.C. instead of in Turkey, generally how these things would work, if they were high-end workers, maybe the janitor doesn't get away with this, but the actual ambassadorial staff, we would say, okay, you have to leave the country, of course, and we expect you to try your citizens in your own local courts. And that's how we do it as well, which is if they say one of our people did something bad in one of their jurisdictions, we say, okay, we'll hold the trial right here in Washington, D.C. or perhaps Northern Virginia. In other words, we're not going to let a Pakistani court judge a U.S. ambassador on blaspheming, whatever. So that, I think, is what it means, and it actually buoys the point that it does apply to all people who are here who don't currently then profess foreign allegiance or have an entanglement with a foreign government that they would have allegiance to.
Well, this is just the leading edge of what's sure to be a long argument with both sides dug in, although there are many sides. I mean, because there's conservatives disagreeing on the interpretation of it. Obviously, everybody on the left believes that the interpretation should be as it has been over these last decades. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio Plus, LibertyNation.com's own podcast, The Uprising, hosted by Scott and me and Lisa K. Donner, are available to you on demand at LibertyNation.com and, of course, from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this week, but we will be back at you next week to scour the election results and see what it really means. This is Tim Donner saying, stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.